Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, villagers, shills, desolators, peasants, vassals, minions, meat sacks. I'm a useful idiot. Welcome. And today I want to go to Nigeria. And things are really getting pretty interesting there, to say the least, as we have this major clusterfuck in Africa. And this is true for several reasons right now. The most prominent one, of course, is that theoretically Boko Haram, which incidentally means no to Western education in their language. Boko Haram is now purportedly declaring allegiance to ISIS in the Middle East. And of course, this is what we've seen happen before with Al-Qaeda, and as many pundits, including myself, have pointed out, this is how it will work. Boko Haram will now have that much more credibility than they did before, and become that much more of a prominent terrorist group, and they love that kind of shit. So, so they're going big time now, and it's probably a good move for them because, as far as public relations go, most Westerners don't care anymore about the 200 schoolgirls that were kidnapped. Incidentally, most of them were never recovered, and became wives to these Boko Haram soldiers. So anyway, that passing fad of being heartbroken about these poor Nigerian school children, well, that's all behind us now. So now we can worry about the fact that they're part of ISIS. And in true ISIS fashion, recently they posted a video chopping off some heads. So sounds like they're with ISIS now. And the other part of this story recently is that two neighboring countries, Chad and Niger, just launched huge offensives, both land and air, against Boko Haram. So there's not much in the Western press right now about that, but that's kind of a big deal. But that's been going on for a while because there's been a African coalition force operating. But also because recently, because of the participation of these neighboring countries in efforts against Boko Haram was also notable recently for attacking all of those neighboring countries. In February, just this past month, they attacked Chad, Niger, and Cameroon. And the usual stuff: kidnappings, bombings, firefights, suicide attacks. And a lot of it is symbolic, just making a step into those countries to prove that they can spread their violence and their message at will. And interestingly enough, and I'll attach some of those videos below, I've reported before about a U.S. presence there already. So the United States is involved, but certainly Nigeria is not as crucial to the United States as it used to be. And in fact, there was a contingency plan if Nigerian oil supplies were threatened for U.S. troops to be stationed there, essentially invade and take over part of the country. But since that time, particularly because of the shale oil boom and all that, Nigerian oil is negligent as far as how much the United States depends on them. And then we also have an interesting situation because once again we find that the U.S. and Iran are on the same side, and oddly enough are both helping to fight Boko Haram in Nigeria. So once again, these claims of Netanyahu about Iran being a sponsor of terrorism around the globe is certainly extremely exaggerated, if not an out-and-out lie. They have proxy forces in their strategic neighborhood, and just like everybody else. But Iran has had consultations with all these West African countries affected by Boko Haram and offered their help. And in fact, Iran's deputy foreign minister said he is confident the group could be defeated with collective action, similar to what we see going on in the Middle East. And that's one of the things that strikes me about what's going on in Nigeria. Not so much the differences between what's going on there in the Middle East, but what the similarities are. First of all, we have the possibility that a insurgent group, in this case Boko Haram, are being used for destabilization efforts, and we also have this. We have them associated with ISIS now. We've seen them use brutal tactics all along, even before their association with ISIS. And then we also have the fact that it's spilled over into all these other neighboring countries, and it's on a pretty large scale. Apparently, the body count for last year is somewhere in the vicinity of 10,000 just for last year. Over 1 million refugees, and of course thousands abducted, and very high profile in the media, these massacres and entire towns destroyed. So Boko Haram certainly has a brutality all their own that will go nicely with their new association with ISIS, and maybe they could compete with each other. But what we have here is a sequence of events. And let's see, starting at the end of January, so in the first 3 months of 2015, essentially we had Cameroon, Chad, Niger, and Nigeria all involved with an 8,700-man force to go after Boko Haram. So the Cameroon, Chad, and Niger are putting together that force. And troops from Chad are already operating in Nigeria against Boko Haram. So well, like I say, in the following month, we had these reprisal attacks from Boko Haram. And there's a lot of other complexities in this situation as well. First of all, as I pointed out, we have the United States involved in some destabilization efforts. And once again, it involves the U.S. Embassy. And so that's one of the things that's problematic, and that brings up embassies like Benghazi and why events unfold the way they do. It's not so much all these fuck-ups that everybody likes to talk about. It's the fact that U.S. embassies are used for subterfuge in all these countries they're in. And the U.S. Embassy in Nigeria, according to WikiLeaks documents, is operating a base for surveillance on the Nigerian government. And they support and fund insurgents and are sponsoring divisive propaganda and political blackmail and bribery. So that's what's coming out of the U.S. Embassy in Nigeria in this complex situation we have in that country with Boko Haram. Once again, it's hard to say whether America is playing both sides or not. And we certainly see some affinities to both the Ukraine and Libya, using the U.S. Embassy for destabilization efforts and supporting these radical groups. And there's clear connections to CIA and Saudi Arabian funding once again. So once again, here we have a country, we have Netanyahu pointing out this vast global network of Iran terrorists, and yet once again we have Iran in this situation working with the United States, being constructive, and yet we have Saudi Arabian funding behind the insurgency in Nigeria. And there's also suggestions that Chad may actually be a major backer of Boko Haram, and that's one of the interesting scandals that goes along with this story, because we have the Chad Basin and this lake in the Borno state, which is where a lot of this activity is and where Boko Haram was born. And there's been recent discoveries of more oil reserves. So now we have oil reserves in other parts of Nigeria. And there's been a certain amount of mystery as to who's been arming Boko Haram, although we have tactics that are similar to the Sunni al-Qaeda. So there seems to be some affinity with Saudi Arabia, or more likely Pakistan. So the likely characters involved here, as usual, the CIA, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia helping to foment this situation. And there was a phantom ceasefire, and this actually ties back to this last January phantom ceasefire brokered by Chad that resulted in this recent Boko Haram offensive. And that's another reason why there's suspicions that Chad might be involved, because they have designs on developing this oil. And in fact, the 2010 survey showed that Lake Chad had vast oil reserves. And since then, Cameroon, Niger, Chad, and Nigeria have all been interested in developing this region. In fact, Cameroon, Niger, and Chad have already been developing in that region. So there's another interesting thing about this. Nigeria hasn't been able to develop any oil in that region because of the threat of Boko Haram, and yet we have Cameroon, Niger, and Chad who have all managed to access and develop around Lake Chad. Certainly that's changing with these new Boko Haram attacks. And France was the original colonial master in Nigeria, so we'll probably see some affinities to what's going on in other former French colonies. And in fact, we've already seen that in places like Chad and Mali. And once again, in Nigeria, we find this the results of the colonialism and these artificial borders that are created. So we have 200 different ethnicities, along with a split between Christians and Muslims. And so these are problems that were bound to resurface due to this post-colonial world. And so another thing that connects Boko Haram, of course, to Saudi Arabia is that they are a Sunni jihadist group, and they have connections with Libya and Chad, and that's where a lot of the weapons are coming from as well, besides what they're getting supplied from other sources. So definitely qualifies as a clusterfuck, and something we need to keep our eye on now, particularly as this war seems to be expanding, with Boko Haram making strikes in all these neighboring countries, and now all these neighboring countries launching a major offensive. And it'll be interesting to see what it takes to bring this into the limelight in Western media. And the other thing that makes this interesting, of course, in the similarities of the Middle East, is we have, ExxonMobil, Shell, and Chevron all have oil interests there, however limited they might be right now, as well as the new American Military Command for Africa, AFRICOM, operating in the region. And so we could end up with a destabilization and breakup, much like we could find in some of these other hot spots with all the same cast of characters and bad actors. And in fact, in 2006, documents from the United States State Department predicted that Nigeria would disintegrate by 2015. 2015. That sounds familiar. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too?